Hey horror fans, welcome back to Room 237, coming at you with another a Hammer horror review. This time I'm doing the third and last of the Hammer Frankenstein films that I own, and that is, I don't know how you can see that, The Evil of Frankenstein. The third of 8 films in their series. Of course I hold up that picture because it's actually part of this set. Hammer Horror 8 film collection, which this is the Blu-ray, but it is the exact same set as the fold-out DVD of the Hammer Collector's Series. The same 8 films: Brides of Dracula, Curse of the Werewolf, Night Creatures, Phantom of the Opera, Paranoiac, Kiss of the Vampire, Nightmare, and Evil of Frankenstein. Now, the thing about The Evil of Frankenstein is, if you watch my review for Revenge of Frankenstein, and if you've seen it, you know how the way that one ended, there's a bunch of possibilities, many different roads they could have gone down with it. But when this film was made, there was some sort of a team up, which, or at least as far as a distribution deal between Hammer and Universal. Meaning, because when Curse of Frankenstein was made, Universal owned the rights to Jack Pierce's style of makeup of the Frankenstein monster. So Hammer had to completely come up with their own style of Frankenstein's monster. But with this new distribution deal, they had free range to do whatever they wanted. They could have made the monster look exactly like Boris Karloff, had they wished to. So because of that, they kinda, more or less, did a soft reboot of the whole series. Which, I mean, I don't really know why. So, instead of really looking at an extension of Revenge with how that one ended, since they were able to make the makeup look just like Jack Pierce's, they decided to reboot it for whatever reason. Because there are continuity errors. It doesn't quite link up with the first two. I mean, he's Frankenstein again, back in London. You know, it opens up with a priest walking in on Frankenstein and his assistant Hans doing their experiments. And we get a flashback to when Frankenstein first created his monster, who, of course, went on a killing spree, then fell into a crevice. And Frankenstein goes back to London so that he can sell some of his stuff from his castle so he can fund his new experiments. But when he gets there, he finds out his castle and lab has been ransacked. A lot of his stuff's already been auctioned off. And they find his monster thawed in ice. Or, excuse me, frozen in ice. They thaw him out. And it's also very similar to other Frankenstein films. I mean, finding him frozen in ice, it's very much like Frankenstein meets the Wolfman. The monster won't follow commands, so they get a hypnotist, but the hypnotist wants him to go after certain people. So it's like with Igor and Son of Frankenstein, or even Ghost of Frankenstein, commanding the monster to go kill people for him. So they really kind of dropped the ball and did like a Hammer best of, almost, or what they thought was the best of the Universal films. The monster, however, you can't really see that. There's a flame in the way. It is more reminiscent of Boris Karloff and Jack Pierce than in the first film of Christopher Lee. You know, he didn't really have the bolts in his neck, at least not that I saw, but he's got the flat top, like, even his forehead's, like, fucking flat as shit. But, you know, he's got the flat top, sort of green, like a pale green, and only, it doesn't just look like a Hammer version of it, like a grotesque, sort of rotted looking version. It almost looked as if Lucio Fulci was redoing a Universal Frankenstein film. It looked like Lucio Fulci's zombie. Like one of those zombies, if one of them was made out to look like the Universal Frankenstein monster. And normally that would be a compliment to say it looked like something from Lucio Fulci's zombie. But in this, and usually the cheapness to Hammer has a lot of charm. But their look of the monster in this, it was incredibly cheap. I mean, because they also have eyeshadow around the eyes to show it's like sunken in. But it's like they didn't really go around the eyelids. So, like, the illusion doesn't really work. The monster is mute again, except when he screams. I mean, there's parts where he's like, "Ooh," but then when he screams, he sounds like a normal human. His boots, you can tell, have platforms in them like this big. He's played by Kiwi Kingston, who's actually a New Zealand wrestler. There are other people, Sandor Ellis, Peter Woodthorpe, Duncan Lamont. There are other members of the cast. This was released in 1964, so 6 years since the previous Frankenstein film. It was directed by Freddie Francis, who wasn't quite as big as Terence Fisher or quite as important as Terence Fisher, but he did direct a number of Hammer horror films. But he he would actually go on to win 2 Academy Awards for cinematography for Sons and Lovers and Glory. But as a director for Hammer, Dracula's Risen from the Grave, Nightmare, which is also on this set. I thought he did more Hammer than that, but there's also Amicus, which was another big horror company at the time. Oh, he also did Hysteria. It's another Hammer. But anyway. So yeah, and of course the ending with the castle being burnt down and destroyed with the monster in it. That's like any of the Universal endings. And I would have to agree with James Rolfe that this one is the most Frankenstein of the whole series, because it is the one that is the most reminiscent of, you know, the Frankenstein before it, meaning Universal. There's also this deaf mute girl who's the only one that the monster will like listen to. I guess it's because she has to communicate the same way. And the reason why he trashes the castle is because he gets drunk. He has a headache. She tries to give him, I think it's wine. He smashes the bottle, then he realizes he likes it. So he goes and gets more and gets drunk. Again, with the cheapness, the atmosphere looks great. I mean, the shots of the castle, you get like the matte paintings for the backgrounds, looks beautiful as always. Or like when people are like when they bump into the stone walls and you hear their hands slap it, it sounds, it looks like it's a set to look like stone. That's all okay. The lab does look the most like a Universal Frankenstein film with all the electrodes and sparks. But with the look of the monster, I mean, it is kind of a hack job. Or when Frankenstein escapes from his jail cell and is trying to beat the angry mob to his castle. He's like standing on the carriage and is the green screen behind him. It's like, I mean, yeah, it looks cheesy, but I thought it looked better in like Clockwork Orange when they were the Durango 95 and they had that kind of background. And some people consider it to be the worst of the Frankenstein series. I've heard things about some of the later sequels, so I'm not really going to come out and say that until I've seen all of them, obviously. It was kind of nice to see a Hammer film that really is kind of like the Universal series. But at the same time, I kind of got that fix with Curse of Frankenstein. I didn't need to see them go all out with Universal. Like, they really didn't have to go back to the well just because they could make the monster look that way. I would have much rather them continued the story with him with his brain in his new body still in hiding. Or not really in hiding, but, you know, continuing from the ending of the last film. Other than that, there's not really much to say, because it really is just a bunch of portions of Universal Frankenstein films done by Hammer. Pretty much a soft reboot. I wouldn't even say soft reboot. It's almost a straightforward reboot. Peter Cushing doesn't have as much to do. He's still great when he's on screen, but there's not enough with his character or the plot for him to really deliver the goods like he did in the first two films. And so, if you're a sucker for Frankenstein like I am, you'll probably like it enough because it's like, oh, it's kind of going back to familiar territory. Okay. Done incredibly cheaply, but okay, I kind of dig it. Which is, I had heard that's what this film was. If you don't know anything about the films and you really liked the ending to Revenge and you want to see how this film continues that, then yeah, I could see how you would be disappointed. But that's basically what it is. It's Hammer really stoked to be allowed to do Universal stuff. So they just rebooted it for that sake only. But that's pretty much, that's why I didn't really have to go that in depth with it. I mean, that's pretty much the plot and everything else. So that's the evil of Frankenstein. And it's the last Hammer Frankenstein film I'll be doing for a little while. I have close to the rest on order, so they'll be here soon. So I'll just be tackling Dracula and whatever else next, at least until my Universal box set comes back. But anyway, thank you for watching.